Hello everybody and welcome back to another daily task chat. Today we are looking at military and war, but before we dive into the task, let me introduce myself and let my fellow colleagues introduce themselves. So my name is Natalie, I'm Head of Change and Communications here at the Society of Genealogists. And if I go to my left again, Ruth.
Me again. I'm Ruth. I'm the Events and Education Manager at the Society of Genealogists.
And Jude.
Hi, I'm Jude Rhodes, and I'm based in the Yorkshire Dales. I'm a family and local historian.
And Liz.
I'm Liz. I'm one of the committee members of Society for One Place Studies, and I've got a variety of one place studies. They're very addictive. I'm researching a street, an institution, and a village.
Fabulous. Let me just share my screen so you can see where we are in the workbook. So today's task is very much about helping you to think outside the box a little bit. So I think generally when we think of military and war, we're quite often naturally drawn to kind of probably the most obvious groups of, people that fought in the war and soldiers, which is absolutely a valid thing to research. And I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just also saying there are lots of other groups that we could consider. So we've compiled this kind of tick list of ideas, really, so that you can go through and think about who you might want to explore, and perhaps in more detail. So the very first part of this exercise is to have a look through that list and see which of those really grabs your attention and gets your imagination going. And I just recognize that should say who, so that will be fixed by the time it goes out to you. And then after you've picked your group of people, the next part of the task is to start doing a detailed exploration. So to try and find an individual that fits within one of those categories or a small group of people so that you can really focus on the detail. Go and explore them, come back and record your findings. So I'll just go back to that list for a second and quickly look at it myself to remind myself what we put in there, and then stop my sharing so we can talk about it. Did any of those different groups of people get your brains or imaginations going?
Yes, the evacuees. I think they're a really interesting group that tends to be forgotten about sometimes in wartime. And yes, generally we're looking at World War II, generally, if we're talking about the UK. But I think it's to remind people not to forget searching on the 1939 register for different places for your ancestor. I was mentioning an example of my mother and her sisters who weren't at the home address. Her mum was and her brother was at the home address, but the girls were in different towns, in different places with different families because they were evacuated. And I think the stories behind being evacuated, I have the privilege of speaking to somebody, it would be about 6 years ago, and he was 104 then. So we're talking a long time ago, when he was involved with evacuees, and he was a teacher in London. And one of his jobs was to gather together all the school children from his very large school in London and escort them on the trains to the different parts of southern England it was. And the heartbreaking tales of the evacuees being matched up with a family to go to.
That's funny. My nan was evacuated to Wales, and when she was about 8, and she kept in contact with the family that she stayed with for years, and she had like actually really fond memories of being evacuated. It was all like quite a pleasant experience. So I'm sure there's a whole wide range of experiences, and if you are lucky enough to know somebody that's still living that was evacuated, go tap them up and call them for memories. Definitely.
Fiona Ranger tomorrow is telling us the story of her mother and her mother's evacuation. So
Right,
yeah.
it's a really good spot. It's funny actually. My mind was actually drawn more to like rule breakers, trying to find people who perhaps disobeyed orders, but perhaps for valid reasons. I kind of got trapped in the romance of that a little bit, and my mind kind of went spinning off. So it's funny what kind of grabs your attention. Any others before we move on?
Well, on that, my grandfather was a storesman. I can't remember what the proper term is in World War II. Yeah, he was called up, and he spotted that it was actually very easy for him or other people doing his job to be pilfering things from the stores. So he actually did it with his senior officers' full knowledge, and ended up being punished for 20 days because he'd done this just to prove that there was this whole problem with the system. And I presume the system was rectified somewhat after that, but yeah.
That's a great example. It's funny, actually, I think we've been naturally drawn to World War II, but actually you could apply these categories to lots of different types of conflicts, internal civil wars as well as national wars. And I think you could also think about the way that some of these roles change over time. So I was thinking in women in particular, the roles that they had before wars, during wars, after wars is in itself a whole kind of topic. So hopefully this will give people some new perspectives to go and explore. And like I say, if you can find a couple of examples of individuals, it doesn't have to be within your family tree or even within your place. It will start to get you thinking, I think. Okay.
I found the conscientious objectors quite interesting as well. In my family, we've got a few people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, so they refused to fight. Some of them did serve. One was in a reserved occupation, but I had another ancestor who was a very strong trade unionist, not a Jehovah's Witness, but he didn't see why our blood, blood of our countrymen or his countrymen should be spilt fighting a war which he didn't see the sense of. And although he was in a reserved occupation, because he'd been an active trade unionist, he was perceived as a troublemaker. And so the owner of the mine where he worked refused to agree to his exemption, and he was made to go but refused and sent to Dartmoor prison. And in there I think it was quite common for them to be moved around several prisons, but he compiled a notebook which I've got a copy of, and it's got the signatures and little drawings, cartoons of all the other people that he was in prison with, or all the other conchies as they were called. So
that's
it's interesting to sort of see, were there any conscientious objectors in your area? How were they treated? Were people handing them white feathers, or were people sympathetic to the cause? It's another interesting aspect to look at, I think. But
I was always told that one of my it would be like a great uncle was a conscientious objector and then became a reverend, and I have yet to find proof of either, but I keep thinking there must be something in that for it to have passed down a generation or two, and yeah, there's one of my to investigate list. So hopefully some of these talks might give me some tips as well.
There's some very good documentary evidence of conscientious objectors who were held in cells in Richmond, North Yorkshire, Castle, in the actual castle, and where they had scratched, like etched messages into the wall, and you can actually see it. It's quite fascinating.
Oh, really fascinating. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Task Chat, and we'll be back tomorrow with another one.